January 1945. Off the coast of Okinawa, alarms shriek across the American fleet. Sailors crane their necks skyward, spotting black dots against the blazing sun. These aren't ordinary enemy aircraft. They're kamikazes, human bombs piloted by men who've sworn to die for their emperor. Traditional anti-aircraft guns thunder desperately, filling the sky with timed explosions that mostly miss their targets. The Japanese suicide attacks have already claimed over 30 American ships. Each diving Zero carries enough explosive power to cripple a destroyer. But hidden inside American shell casings lies a revolutionary secret, a tiny device that can sense when to explode, turning every shot into a precision strike. This is the story of the proximity fuze, the weapon that transformed suicide attacks from an unstoppable tide into a death trap for those who dared approach American ships. When kamikaze determination met American innovation, the Pacific War's deadliest chapter was about to unfold. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The metallic taste of fear filled every mouth aboard the USS Bunker Hill as Lieutenant Commander Joseph Carmichael pressed binoculars to his eyes. The date was January 15, 1945. Through the salt spray and morning haze off Okinawa's coast, he counted them, 37 black specks growing larger against the orange sun. Kamikaze aircraft, each piloted by a man who had already written his death poem. "All stations, this is combat," crackled the intercom. Bogies inbound bearing 090, range 12 miles. The 5-inch gun swiveled toward the horizon. Carmichael had witnessed this dance of death before at Leyte Gulf. American gunners would fire timed shells, hoping their explosions would catch the diving Japanese planes. Most shots would detonate harmlessly in empty sky. The few that connected often came too late, after Zero fighters had already released their bombs or crashed into American hulls. Since October 1944, these suicide attacks had sunk 34 United States Navy vessels and damaged hundreds more. The statistics haunted every sailor in the Pacific Fleet. Traditional anti-aircraft artillery achieved kill rates of only 12% against diving aircraft. Mathematics favored the kamikazes. If enough planes dove simultaneously, several would inevitably break through the defensive barrage. But inside the brass casings of the Bunker Hill's ammunition lay a secret that would transform this equation. Each shell contained a device no larger than a coffee cup, packed with vacuum tubes and circuitry that could detect the presence of an aircraft and trigger detonation at the optimal moment. The proximity fuse represented 3 years of desperate innovation, born from the recognition that America's survival depended on turning every artillery round into a precision weapon. The first Zero broke from formation, its engine screaming as it entered its final dive toward the American destroyer's screen. What happened next would demonstrate how American industrial genius had created a weapon that could think, sense, and kill with unprecedented accuracy. In a cramped office in Washington, District of Columbia, Dr. Merle Anthony Tuve stubbed out his cigarette and stared at the equations covering his blackboard. The date was March 8, 1942. Snow fell outside the windows of the Carnegie Institution, where Section T of the National Defense Research Committee had established its headquarters. Tuve led a team of scientists racing to solve an impossible problem: how to build a shell that could detect an enemy aircraft and explode at precisely the right moment. The vacuum tube must survive forces that would kill a man instantly. Tuve muttered to his assistant, Dr. Lawrence Hafstad, 20,000 times the force of gravity, spinning 25,000 revolutions per minute. Temperature changes from -40 to +160 degrees Fahrenheit. The concept seemed simple enough. Radio waves transmitted from a tiny device inside an artillery shell would bounce off approaching aircraft and return to a receiver. When the return signal reached sufficient strength, indicating close proximity to a target, an electric circuit would trigger the shell's explosive charge. In theory, this proximity fuse would eliminate the guesswork that plagued traditional timed artillery. In practice, every prototype had failed catastrophically. The delicate vacuum tubes shattered under the tremendous acceleration forces generated when a 5-inch naval gun fired. Those tubes that survived the initial blast were destroyed by the shell's rotation as it spiraled through the air. Moisture from humid Pacific conditions short-circuited the electronics. Heat from the gun barrel melted solder connections. "We've tested 47 prototypes," Hofstad reported, consulting his laboratory notes. "Only 23 survived firing. Of those, just 11 maintained electrical function for more than 30 seconds of flight." Tuve walked to his window, watching federal employees hurry through the Washington winter. Somewhere in the Pacific, American sailors were dying because their anti-aircraft guns couldn't hit fast-moving enemy planes. Traditional artillery required gunners to estimate an aircraft's speed, altitude, and direction, then calculate when to detonate their shells. Even experienced crews achieved hit rates below 15% against maneuvering targets. The proximity fuse promised to revolutionize aerial warfare, but only if Tuve's team could engineer circuits robust enough to function inside an artillery shell. Every component had to be miniaturized, hardened, and manufactured by the millions. The project demanded precision manufacturing techniques that pushed American industry beyond its existing capabilities. Tuve opened his project journal and wrote, "March 8, 1942, we gamble everything on this fuse. If we succeed, American ships will survive the Pacific War. If we fail, our sailors will die fighting with obsolete weapons against an enemy that grows more desperate each month." The factory whistle shrieked across Cincinnati, Ohio, at 11:47 p.m. on November 3, 1942. Inside the Crossley Corporation plant, fluorescent lights illuminated assembly lines where women in blue coveralls bent over workbenches, soldering connections on devices smaller than cigarette packs. These workers had no idea they were building components for America's most secret weapon. Powell Crossley, Jr. had converted his radio manufacturing facility to wartime production with startling speed. Assembly lines that once produced civilian radios now manufactured proximity fuses under contracts so classified that even plant supervisors didn't fully understand their purpose. Workers received instructions to build radio parts for the Navy and asked no questions about their ultimate function. Mary Catherine Sullivan, a 26-year-old mother from Newport, Kentucky, had joined Crossley's night shift after her husband shipped out with the 1st Marine Division. She earned 63 cents per hour inspecting vacuum tubes that measured just 2 inches in length. Each tube had to pass rigorous electrical tests while weighing. Less than 2 ounces, specifications that challenged every principle of radio. "Engineering, these components are smaller than anything we built for civilian radios," Sullivan told her supervisor, Helen Morrison. "Why does the Navy need electronics this tiny?" Morrison had signed security agreements that forbade discussing technical details. "The Navy has its reasons," she replied. "Our job is building them right, not asking why." By December 1942, Crossley had achieved production of 40,000 proximity fuses per week. Similar assembly lines operated at Sylvania Electric Products in Ipswich, Massachusetts, Radio Corporation of America in Harrison, New Jersey, and Eastman Kodak Company in Rochester, New York. Each facility maintained absolute secrecy about the devices they manufactured. The technical specifications seemed impossible to meet consistently. Vacuum tubes had to survive acceleration forces of 25,000 times normal gravity while maintaining electrical function. Solder joints needed to hold through temperature variations from Arctic cold to tropical heat. Radio transmitters had to operate reliably after being spun at 25,000 revolutions per minute. Workers at the Ipswich plant established production records that defied pre-war manufacturing standards. By 1943, they were completing 8,000 proximity fuses daily, with each device tested for electrical function, mechanical durability, and waterproofing. Quality control inspectors rejected any fuse that failed to meet specifications, sending defective units back for complete rebuild. At midnight, freight trains departed Cincinnati carrying wooden crates marked Top Secret VT Material Naval Ordnance. These shipments traveled under armed guard to East Coast ports, where they were loaded aboard ammunition ships bound for the Pacific Fleet. The workers who built these devices would never learn how their handiwork performed in combat, but their precision manufacturing was about to save thousands of American lives. Thunder rolled across the Potomac River as 5-inch naval guns fired in rapid succession at Dahlgren Proving Ground, Virginia. The date was July 16, 1943. Lieutenant Commander William Sterling Parsons stood behind protective barriers, watching through telescopes as artillery shells detonated against the summer sky. Each explosion represented months of engineering refinement and hundreds of hours of testing. Parsons had overseen proximity fuse development since early 1941, when the concept existed only in theoretical form. Now he commanded live-fire trials that would determine whether American industry could mass-produce a weapon capable of revolutionizing anti-aircraft warfare. The stakes could not be higher: intelligence. Reports indicated that Japan was developing new aircraft and tactics that threatened to overwhelm traditional naval defenses. Target: drone launching, announced Chief Petty Officer Frank Wilson from the control tower. A remote-controlled aircraft lifted off from the testing range, climbing to 3,000 feet altitude while following a predetermined flight path. This target would simulate a Japanese bomber approaching an American task force. The first salvo erupted from gun mount number 2, 3 proximity-fused shells that climbed toward the drone aircraft. Traditional timed fuses would require gunners to estimate the target's speed and direction, then hope their calculations proved accurate. The new proximity fuses eliminated guesswork by detecting the target automatically and detonating at optimal range. Radio waves transmitted from each shell bounced off the approaching drone and returned to miniaturized receivers. When signal strength indicated proximity to the target, electronic circuits triggered explosive charges that filled the surrounding airspace with deadly fragments. The technology transformed every artillery round into a smart weapon that could adapt to changing tactical conditions. The first shell detonated 40 yards from the target, close enough to damage a real aircraft, but not sufficient for a clean kill. The second shell exploded 30 yards away, demonstrating improved accuracy. The third shell burst just 15 yards from the drone, filling the sky with fragments that would have shredded any enemy bomber. Proximity fuses are functioning within design parameters, Parsons noted in his test report. Average burst distance, 28 yards. Estimated kill probability against bomber-type aircraft, 73%. These statistics represented a revolutionary improvement over traditional anti-aircraft artillery. Timed fuse achieved kill rates below 20% against maneuvering targets, while proximity fuses demonstrated effectiveness exceeding 70% under controlled conditions. When American gunners fired proximity-fused shells in combat, they would enjoy advantages that enemy pilots could neither anticipate nor counter. The drone crashed into the Potomac River, its wreckage joining dozens of previous targets destroyed during proximity fuse testing. Parsons watched recovery crews motor toward the crash site, knowing that similar scenes would soon play out across the Pacific Ocean, except the falling aircraft would be Japanese bombers filled with explosives, and American sailors would survive battles they might otherwise have lost. Tropical rain drummed against the steel deck of USS Helena as she patrolled the waters north of Guadalcanal. The date was January 5, 1943. Lieutenant Robert Hayes manned the director of gun mount number 3, scanning the horizon through binoculars while his crew prepared for what would become the proximity fuse's first combat test. Bogies bearing 045. Range 8 miles, announced the radar operator over the ship's communication system. Count 4 aircraft, probably Nakajima Type 97 bombers. Helena had received her first shipment of proximity-fused ammunition 3 weeks earlier, along with strict orders to maintain absolute secrecy about the new weapon's capabilities. Only the ship's senior gunnery officers knew they carried shells that could automatically detect and destroy enemy aircraft. The rest of the crew believed they were testing improved timed fuses. The approaching Japanese formation consisted of 4 Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers attempting to attack American transport ships unloading supplies for the Guadalcanal campaign. These aircraft carried 18-inch torpedoes capable of sinking destroyers with single hits. Traditional anti-aircraft fire had proven inadequate against low-flying torpedo bombers, which could release their weapons and escape before timed shells reached effective range. Load proximity fuses, ordered Commander Edward Hooper, Helena's gunnery officer, set range for automatic detonation. The first salvo thundered from Helena's 5-inch guns at 0847 hours. 3 shells climbed toward the lead Japanese bomber, their radio transmitters already searching for targets. The bomber pilot, Flight Petty Officer Saburo Yamamoto, had no warning that he faced a revolutionary weapon system. Traditional anti-aircraft shells would have detonated at predetermined times, creating brief explosions that bomber pilots could often avoid through evasive maneuvering. The proximity fuses eliminated such escape opportunities by detonating automatically when enemy aircraft approached within lethal range. The second shell burst 35 yards from Yamamoto's bomber, filling the surrounding airspace with steel fragments. The Nakajima's port wing disintegrated instantly, sending the aircraft spinning. Into the Pacific Ocean, Yamamoto had no opportunity to release his torpedo or warn his squadron mates about the unprecedented accuracy of American anti-aircraft fire. Direct hit on lead. "Bogey," reported the radar operator. "Target destroyed." Helena's gunners achieved 3 confirmed kills during the engagement, destroying 75% of the attacking formation. This success rate exceeded anything previously recorded by American anti-aircraft artillery in the Pacific theater. Traditional timed fuses typically achieved kill rates below 15% against low-flying torpedo bombers. The engagement lasted 7 minutes and consumed 24 proximity fused shells. Helena suffered no damage while completely disrupting the Japanese attack against American transport vessels. The proximity fuse had passed its first combat test, demonstrating effectiveness that would transform naval warfare throughout the Pacific. Campaign.Commander Hooper filed a classified after-action report noting exceptional performance of new ammunition type without revealing specific technical details. Similar reports would soon flood Admiral Chester Nimitz's headquarters as proximity fuses spread throughout the Pacific Fleet. Flight Petty Officer Takeshi Nakamura knelt before the small Shinto shrine in his barracks at Kanoya Air Base, Kagoshima Prefecture. The date was October 18, 1944. Cherry blossom petals fell outside his window as he completed his final prayers before joining the Special Attack Unit. Known to Americans as kamikaze pilots, Nakamura had trained for 18 months to become a naval aviator, mastering the complexities of the Mitsubishi A6M0 fighter. But Japan's desperate situation now demanded that pilots use their aircraft as guided bombs, sacrificing their lives to sink American warships. Fuel shortages had reduced pilot training to just 3 months. Barely enough time to learn basic flying skills. "The Americans have superior numbers," explained Lieutenant Commander Motoharu Okamura during the briefing. "But they cannot match our spiritual strength. 1 aircraft, 1 ship, this is our path to victory." Nakamura understood the mathematics behind Japan's suicide tactics. Traditional bombing attacks achieved hit rates below 10% against heavily defended American task forces. Kamikaze attacks, where pilots crashed their explosive-laden aircraft directly into enemy ships, promised success rates exceeding 50%. Simple arithmetic suggested that trading Japanese aircraft for American vessels favored Japan's strategic position. The reality proved more complex. American anti-aircraft defenses had improved dramatically since 1943, incorporating new technologies that Japanese intelligence failed to comprehend fully. Radar-directed fire control systems allowed American gunners to track multiple targets simultaneously, while coordinating defensive barrages that created overlapping zones of destruction. More troubling were reports from surviving kamikaze pilots describing anti-aircraft shells that seemed to explode with uncanny accuracy. Traditional timed artillery created brief, localized explosions that determined pilots could often survive through evasive maneuvering. The new American shells appeared to detect approaching aircraft and detonate at optimal range, creating inescapable killing zones. Many of our comrades never reached their targets, admitted Flight Petty Officer Hiroshi Yamada, one of the few kamikaze pilots to survive a mission after his aircraft suffered engine failure. The American guns fire differently now. The shells explode closer to our aircraft than seems possible. Nakamura wrote his final letter to his parents in rural Miyazaki Prefecture. Honorable Father and Mother, when you receive this letter, I will have joined our ancestors in the Yasukuni Shrine. Please do not grieve for your unworthy son. My death will protect the homeland from American invasion. He sealed the letter with traditional wax, then attached a lock of his hair for his parents to remember him. Similar letters filled the mail sacks at Japanese air bases throughout the home islands, as young men prepared for missions they would not survive. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The proximity fuze represented technology beyond Japanese comprehension, miniaturized electronics that transformed every American artillery shell into a precision weapon. While Japanese pilots trained to die for their emperor, American engineers had created weapons that made such sacrifice futile. The horizon erupted in tracers and explosive bursts as over 300 Japanese aircraft descended toward the US American invasion fleet off Leyte Gulf. The date was October 25, 1944, aboard USS St. Lo. Lieutenant Commander Richard Fleming coordinated anti-aircraft fire from gun mount number 4, while kamikaze pilots dove through walls of proximity-fused shells. Operation Shogo represented Japan's most desperate gamble, a coordinated attack combining conventional naval forces with massed kamikaze strikes designed to destroy American amphibious shipping. Admiral Takejiro Onishi had personally briefed the suicide pilots, promising them that their deaths would change the war's outcome and protect the Japanese homeland from invasion. Bogies everywhere, reported the Combat Information Center. Count exceeds 200 aircraft. Multiple types, coordinated attack. Pattern. American task force commanders had anticipated this moment since receiving intelligence about Japan's special attack units. The proximity fuse offered unprecedented defensive capabilities, but no weapon could guarantee complete protection against such massive coordinated attacks. Success would depend on disciplined fire control and the revolutionary accuracy of automatically detonating artillery shells. The first wave of kamikaze aircraft approached from multiple directions, forcing American gunners to distribute their fire across wide sectors. Traditional anti-aircraft tactics concentrated defensive firepower against single formations, but the proximity fuse enabled new defensive concepts based on overlapping zones of automatically triggered destruction. USS White Plains opened fire at maximum range, her 5-inch guns sending proximity-fused shells toward a formation of Nakajima B-6N torpedo bombers. The shells climbed to 8,000 feet before their radio transmitters detected approaching aircraft. Electronic circuits triggered explosive charges that filled the sky with steel fragments, shredding wings and fuselages with unprecedented precision. Splash 3 bogies, announced the Air Defense Coordinator. White Plains reports multiple hits with new ammunition, but the kamikaze attacks achieved some success despite American technological advantages. Sheer numbers overwhelmed defensive fire as surviving Japanese pilots pressed their attacks through the anti-aircraft barrage. USS St. Lo suffered a direct hit when Flight Petty Officer Yukio Seki crashed his Zero fighter into her flight deck, triggering explosions that sank the escort carrier. Within 30 minutes, the battle demonstrated both the proximity, fuze's revolutionary effectiveness, and the limitations of any defensive system against determined mass attacks. American gunners achieved kill rates exceeding 60%, a dramatic improvement over traditional anti-aircraft fire, but could not prevent all enemy aircraft from reaching their targets. Wreckage of over 200 Japanese aircraft littered the waters around Leyte Gulf, testament to the proximity fuze's devastating impact on enemy air power. Most kamikaze pilots died without achieving their objectives, their sacrifice rendered futile by American technological superiority. The engagement marked a turning point in Pacific naval warfare. Japanese commanders recognized that their suicide tactics while achieving some tactical success, could not overcome the mathematical advantages provided by proximity-fused anti-aircraft artillery. Steam hissed from industrial machinery at the Sylvania Electric Products plant in Ipswich, Massachusetts, as the night shift began production on December 7, 1944, exactly 3 years after Pearl Harbor. Under harsh fluorescent lighting, workers assembled proximity fuse with assembly line efficiency that had become the hallmark of American war production. Margaret O'Brien, a supervisor from nearby Salem, watched quality control inspectors test each fuse for electrical function, mechanical durability, and resistance to moisture. Every device had to meet specifications that seemed impossible. When the project began, vacuum tubes smaller than cigarettes that could survive artillery forces while maintaining radio transmission capabilities. We're producing 18,000 fuses per day. O'Brien reported to plant manager Harold Davidson, "Quality rejection rate has dropped to less than 2%. Our workers are hitting every production target the Navy sets." The statistics represented industrial achievement that dwarfed anything attempted in peacetime. Sylvania alone had manufactured over 5 million proximity fuses since late 1942, while sister plants at Crosley Corporation, Radio Corporation of America, and Eastman Kodak had contributed millions more. American industry was producing proximity fuse faster than the Pacific Fleet could fire them. Cost reduction paralleled production increases through engineering refinements and manufacturing innovations. The first proximity fuses cost $732 each to produce in 1942. By late 1944, mass production techniques had reduced unit cost to $18, a 40-fold improvement that made the weapons economically viable for widespread use. The Navy wants 110,000. Fuse by January 15th, Davidson announced during the weekly production meeting. That means we need to increase daily output by 30% while maintaining current quality standards. Such demands would have seemed impossible in 1941, but American manufacturing had transformed itself to meet wartime requirements. Assembly lines operated 24 hours daily, 7 days per week. Workers perfected techniques for handling components so delicate that static electricity could damage their circuits. The human cost of this industrial achievement remained largely invisible to consumers. Workers endured 12-hour shifts in poorly ventilated factories, handling toxic chemicals used in electronics manufacturing. Many suffered respiratory problems from prolonged exposure to industrial solvents, while others developed repetitive stress injuries from assembling thousands of tiny components daily. But these workers understood that their efforts directly supported American forces fighting in the Pacific. Every proximity fuse they completed would save American lives by destroying enemy aircraft before they could attack naval vessels. The connection between factory production and battlefield survival motivated workers to exceed every production target. By January 1945, American industry had delivered over 22 million proximity fuses to military forces worldwide. This represented more advanced electronic devices than existed in the entire civilian economy before the war. The proximity fuse had become one of history's most successful examples of rapid technology development and mass production. Alarms wailed across Task Force 58 as radar operators detected the largest kamikaze formation in Pacific War history approaching from the north. The date was April 6, 1945. Operation Kikusui had begun, Japan's final desperate attempt to destroy the American invasion fleet surrounding Okinawa through massed suicide attacks involving over 1,800. Aircraft Admiral Raymond Spruance watched from USS New Mexico's bridge as the horizon filled with enemy aircraft diving through overlapping zones of proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire. The proximity fuse had proven its effectiveness during previous battles, but nothing had prepared American forces for an attack of this magnitude. Air raid! Air raid! Announced the Task Force Communication Network. All stations condition red. Multiple bogies, bearing 350 through 045. Range decreasing. The first wave consisted of over 300 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters, each carrying a 500-pound bomb and piloted by men who had written farewell letters to their families. These aircraft approached at low altitude to avoid radar detection, climbing to attack altitude only during their final approaches to American ships. USS Laffey, a destroyer on radar picket duty, engaged the leading kamikaze formation with all available weapons. Her 5-inch guns fired proximity-fused shells that created a defensive barrier of automatically detonating explosions. Each shell climbed to intercept altitude, detected approaching aircraft through radio transmission, and triggered its warhead when enemy planes approached within lethal range. "Splash 4 bogies," reported Laffey's gunnery officer. Proximity fuses functioning normally. Multiple hits observed. But the sheer number of attacking aircraft overwhelmed even the revolutionary defensive capabilities provided by proximity fuses. While American gunners achieved kill rates exceeding 70%, far superior to traditional anti-aircraft fire, they could not destroy every kamikaze before some reached their targets. Flight Lieutenant Saburo Dohi dove his Zero toward USS Bush, weaving through anti-aircraft bursts that seemed to anticipate his every maneuver. The proximity-fused shells created killing zones that forced him into increasingly desperate evasive actions, but his determination to die for the Emperor drove him through the defensive fire. Bush suffered direct hits from 2 kamikaze aircraft within minutes, the explosions tearing through her superstructure and flooding her engine compartments. Despite proximity-fused protection, the destroyer sank within 2 hours, one of 36 American vessels lost during the Okinawa campaign. The battle continued for 10 hours as successive waves of Japanese aircraft pressed their attacks against the invasion fleet. American anti-aircraft gunners fired over 40,000 proximity-fused shells, achieving an unprecedented kill rate that saved hundreds of ships from destruction. When the attacks finally ended, over 1,500 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed, the highest single-day loss in aviation history. The proximity fuse had transformed what might have been a devastating defeat into a costly but manageable tactical setback for American forces. Charts and graphs covered every wall of the Navy Department's Operations Center in Washington, District of Columbia, as Admiral Ernest King reviewed battle damage assessments from the Okinawa campaign. The date was May 15, 1945. Statistical analysis demonstrated that the proximity fuse had fundamentally altered the mathematics of naval warfare. Proximity fused ammunition accounts for 68% of confirmed aircraft kills, reported Commander James Russell, the Navy's Ordnance Effectiveness Analyst. Traditional timed fuses achieve kill rates below 15% under similar conditions. King studied the numbers with growing satisfaction. The proximity fuse represented exactly the kind of technological advantage that American industrial capacity could provide, a weapon so advanced that enemies could neither copy nor counter it effectively. Mass production had transformed a laboratory curiosity into the Pacific Fleet's primary anti-aircraft defense. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal reviewed casualty statistics that told the proximity fuse's story in human terms. During the Okinawa campaign, American forces had suffered 4,107 sailors killed and 4,124 wounded from kamikaze attacks. While these losses were tragic, they represented far fewer casualties than pre-battle estimates had predicted. Without proximity fuses, our losses would have been 3 to 4 times higher, Forrestal noted in his assessment to President Harry Truman. This weapon has saved thousands of American lives while maintaining our naval superiority in the Pacific. The statistical evidence overwhelmingly supported Forrestal's conclusion. Traditional anti-aircraft fire achieved average kill rates of 12 to 15% against diving aircraft under combat conditions. Proximity-fused shells demonstrated effectiveness, rates exceeding 70% in controlled tests and over 60% during actual battles. These improvements translated directly into battlefield advantages that Japanese forces could not overcome through tactical adjustments or increased determination. When American ships fired proximity-fused anti-aircraft rounds, they created defensive zones that enemy aircraft could not penetrate without suffering prohibitive losses. The Japanese are running out of trained pilots, reported intelligence analyst Captain Edwin Layton. Kamikaze training has been reduced to 3 months, barely enough time to learn basic flying skills. Most suicide pilots now have less than 50 hours of flight experience. This intelligence highlighted the proximity fuse's strategic impact beyond its immediate tactical advantages. By destroying Japanese aircraft at unprecedented rates, the weapon had accelerated the depletion of enemy air power, while forcing Japan into increasingly desperate expedients that consumed scarce resources. Without achieving meaningful military objectives, Admiral King authorized expanded proximity fuse production for the planned invasion of Japan. American industry would manufacture additional millions of these weapons, ensuring that every anti-aircraft gun in the Pacific could fire automatically detonating shells. Such overwhelming firepower advantages would make Japanese resistance futile. Regardless of enemy determination or sacrifice, the proximity fuse had become more than a weapon. It represented proof that American democracy's industrial capacity could overcome any totalitarian military tradition through superior technology and unlimited production capability. Air raid sirens wailed across Tokyo as Flight Lieutenant Hiroshi Yamamoto prepared for what he knew would be his final mission. The date was June 10, 1945. Japan's remaining aircraft were grounded for lack of aviation gasoline, while American B-29 bombers reduced Japanese cities to ashes with impunity. Yamamoto commanded one of the last operational kamikaze units at Kanoya Air Base. His squadron possessed only 12 flyable aircraft, patched Mitsubishi Zeros burning, low-grade fuel distilled from pine roots. These planes represented Japan's final desperate attempt to inflict meaningful damage on American invasion forces gathering for operation. Downfall: the Americans have developed new anti-aircraft weapons, admitted Captain Rikihei Inaguchi during the mission briefing. Our pilots report that enemy shells explode with unprecedented accuracy. Many aircraft are destroyed before reaching their targets. Intelligence reports described American anti-aircraft fire that seemed to anticipate Japanese tactics. Traditional defensive barrages created brief localized explosions that skilled pilots could avoid through evasive maneuvering. The new American weapons appeared to track approaching aircraft and detonate automatically at optimal range. These reports puzzled Japanese commanders, who lacked the technological background to understand proximity fuse capabilities. Japan's electronics industry remained decades behind American developments in miniaturized components and radio technology. The concept of artillery shells containing automatic target detection systems exceeded Japanese engineering comprehension. We have lost over 3,800 pilots in kamikaze attacks. Inaguchi continued, enemy shipping continues to operate freely around Okinawa. Our sacrifice has not achieved the strategic objectives that Admiral Onishi promised. Yamamoto understood the mathematical futility of Japan's situation. American proximity fuses had transformed kamikaze attacks from a promising tactical innovation into a form of national suicide that consumed irreplaceable resources without corresponding benefits. Japan was trading trained pilots and scarce aircraft for minimal damage to an enemy industrial base that could replace losses faster than Japan could inflict them. The strategic implications extended beyond immediate battlefield considerations. Japan's civilian population faced starvation as American submarines and aircraft destroyed merchant shipping. Industrial production had collapsed due to raw material shortages and bombing damage. The homeland lacked sufficient fuel, ammunition, and food to sustain resistance through the coming winter. When you die today, you will join 3 million of our countrymen who have already given their lives for the Emperor, Inaguchi concluded. Your sacrifice will inspire future generations to remember that Japanese spirit cannot be conquered. But Yamamoto recognized that spirit alone could not overcome American technological and industrial advantages. The proximity fuse represented a level of scientific sophistication that Japan could not match, even if the war continued for years. American factories were producing these advanced weapons by the millions, while Japanese industry struggled to manufacture basic ammunition. He climbed into his Zero fighter for the last time, knowing that his death would accomplish nothing beyond adding his name to the growing list of kamikaze casualties. Victory parades filled the streets of American cities on September the 2nd, 1945, as news of Japan's surrender spread across the nation. In Cincinnati, Ohio, workers from the Crosley Corporation plant gathered to watch Navy veterans march beneath banners celebrating the proximity fuse's contribution to Allied victory. The weapon they had built in secret had helped end the Pacific War. Mary Catherine Sullivan stood with her 5-year-old daughter on Vine Street, watching sailors who had survived kamikaze attacks thanks to the proximity fuses she had assembled during those long midnight shifts. Her husband had returned from Okinawa with stories about anti-aircraft guns that seemed to hit every target, though military censorship still prevented detailed discussion of the weapon's technical capabilities. "Those shells we built saved thousands of American lives," explained Powell Crosley Jr. during the plant's victory celebration. "The proximity fuse was one of the war's most important innovations, and you workers made it possible through your dedication and precision." The statistics supported Crosley's assessment. American industry had manufactured over 22 million proximity fuses between 1942 and 1945, representing the largest production run of advanced electronic devices in history. The cost per unit had dropped from $700 to $32 to $18 through manufacturing innovations that would revolutionize post-war electronics production. Dr. Merrill Touvier received the Presidential Medal for Merit for his leadership of the Proximity Fuse project. The miniaturized electronics his team developed would find civilian applications in television, radio, and eventually computer technology. Wartime innovations in mass-producing delicate components established American leadership in consumer electronics that would last for decades. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal summarized the weapon's impact in his final report to Congress. "The proximity fuse has helped blaze the trail to Japan. Without the protection this ingenious device has afforded our ships, the cost in men and ships would have been immeasurably greater." Veterans of Pacific battles understood this assessment through personal experience. Sailors who had survived kamikaze attacks at Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa knew that proximity fuses had created defensive zones that enemy aircraft could not penetrate. The weapon had transformed desperate defensive battles into systematic destruction of Japanese air power. The proximity fuse's legacy extended far beyond its wartime applications. Miniaturized electronics developed for military use would enable the post-war boom in consumer products that made America the world's dominant technological power. Television sets, portable radios, and eventually personal computers all traced their ancestry to innovations first developed for automatically detonating artillery shells. In 1950, 5-year-old Tommy Sullivan played with his family's new Crosley radio in their Cincinnati living room, unaware that the company had once manufactured the secret weapon that helped win World War II. The proximity fuse had disappeared into classified files, but its technological descendants would transform American society in ways that wartime engineers never imagined. If you enjoyed the story I handpicked, this next story that you will enjoy, please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.